The last time we were turning, we glued ring number 2 to ring number 1, and you can see on our drawing, ring number 1 refers to these numbers over here. So this is the base that's got the bottom in it, and ring number 2 is what we glued on. And now we're going to go ahead and turn the inside diameter and the outside diameter of ring number 2. So one thing I want to point is over here on the piece, I want to put marks, and we'll run a circle around showing the inside diameter and the outside diameter. The inside diameter and the outside diameter can be seen. So the inside diameter is of ring 2 at the top is 2 5/8. The outside diameter of that ring at the top is 6 1/4. So I'm going to put those two dimensions on the piece, and I like to burn 10 inches, and I can just read it real close. And then we'll turn a circle here and one here. And I always like to double check, measure twice, right? So I double check this, my inside and my outside diameters, and it looks like I'm right on the money. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn this inside down, and we're going to blend it into the bottom. The outside, basically all we're going to do on the outside diameter is knock the corners off. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. One thing I want to point out, when I'm cutting this curve, I look back to my drawing and I see that that's a concaved stretch that's concave. So I kind of get an eyeball here as far as how much it's concaved off the drawing. Remember, this drawing is to actual size. So from that, and I'll do that on the outside also, I'll look at, as we do various rings, I'll look at the shape, whether those are straight, curved in, or whether concaved or convex, and that will get me really pretty close to the drawing, because we're only looking at the 3/4 inch long segment. So with that, go to the tool here, and we're going to blend that into the bottom. That's what we're going to do next. Phenomenal, because you look at these strings, you think about it, those are individual pieces. There's thousands of pieces in there, and they're all glued end to end. So it's kind of neat that you can get a long piece of string like this out. It's all glued together. Pretty cool. When you hear that vibration coming, it's picking up a resonant frequency in the turn, and you want to avoid that, because when that's happening, you're putting a little bit of it. Okay, here's where it's got to be real careful coming into that plywood. In fact, I think I'd mentioned there were 3 methods of bottoms that are used. I prefer the plywood bottom, because I can feather that right into the bottom and not have to worry about any gaps. If I were to make a floating bottom, then I've got to put a shoulder in there to allow for that edge. With the glued in bottom, I can bring it right down. Excuse me. Now we're to the point here where I've got to be real careful. I want to make sure my tool is real sharp, so I use a little diamond file, and basically I just around. And file it like that, it's done. If you can see on the end of the tool where the metal is shiny, that's the surface that I've touched with the diamond file. So rather than running it to the grinder all the time, I can simply run the diamond hone over it and get right back to a really sharp tool again. So now I'm going to sneak up, really sneak up on this, on side E, or on the bottom I mean. Now this veneer that I put on this bottom is a little thicker than what we did the other day. Normal veneer is about 40 thousandths. This veneer that I put on here is closer to 80 thousandths. So if I do get into it, it's not the end of the world. But if you got veneer that's only 40 thousandths thick, it doesn't take much to get into it. I still got a little bit there yet, so but we're getting close. So I'll try one more time here. Sometimes you can see better by looking at the opposite side. And what I do is, you can just see where I just touched it. But I'll get it close and then do the last little bit with sandpaper. I think I just got it. It doesn't take much. Yeah, there's still, you can still see the corners of the segments there, so I got a little bit more to go. You can hear the difference. You can hear the higher pitch when I hit the veneer. If you listen to that, you can stay out of the veneer. I'm not sure you can pick it up on the camera there, but I'll run into it here. Hear the difference? I think that'll do it. Yeah, we're into it close enough now that it's just probably a couple thousandths off. And I can go in with sandpaper and clean that up real quick, get rid of all that. The other thing I like to do, yeah, there's still, you can still see a little bit there. Rather than spend our time chasing after that, a couple things I want to point out. I'll take the air compressor, and because once I get this done, this bottom's completely done and won't be touched anymore, so I want to make sure that it's all totally ready for varnish. The other thing I like to do is, once I take the air compressor and blow out the sawdust, it's really important on walnut, because walnut will hold the sawdust in the grain. The cherry is a little tighter grain. So when I get all that done, and after I sand it, I like to take some mineral spirits, and I go in with mineral spirits and coat it. Now, all my finish I use polyurethane finish, oil-based finish. I'm not so sure this would be such a good idea if you're using a water base. It vapors off and it doesn't give me any problems, but I'm not sure I'd try this if you're using an oil base. But you can see that's just with the chisel. I don't even see any sanding marks. Of course, we're not sanding, so we wouldn't see. I don't see any tooling marks. Okay, so I'm not sure whether that really needs a whole lot of sanding. I like to sand at least for just a few seconds so I can say I sanded it. But really, if you got good sharp tools, there's not a need for a whole lot of sanding. So I think that's good enough for now. I see a couple little spots. Actually, the spots I saw have gone away with the mineral spirits. And this is going to give you a good image, a good picture of what it's going to look like with the finish on it. If you have any sanding marks or tooling marks, you're going to see it with the mineral spirits. So that being said, I want to turn the ID, and all I'm going to do on the ID is just knock off the flats.
And you're just using a scraper for all of those?
I love this scraper. This is probably my most favorite tool. It's heavy, very heavy. This happens to be a Hamlin, it doesn't matter, but It's got some really nice steel in it. I can sharpen it and keep it sharp, and it just works great. The other thing I just about goofed up on here. Usually I start off with a I don't use a scraper to knock the corners off. I like to do this because I can knock those corners off and stick it up on the side. Now I like to do this because you're not sitting there going chunk, chunk, chunk as it's trying to make it round. So then I'll go back to the scraper. The scraper is like all the other tools. I rub the bevel so I can start off high like that and hit the bottom of the tool. And then just raise the handle until it starts to cut the amount that I want to cut. And again, I get this nice rivet effect. Sometimes I can get it running totally over my shoulder and pile that behind me on the ground. That's kind of cool. Now I'm going to go up to my mark. Okay, that's done. So at this point I'm ready to glue the next ring on. The other thing I like to do is, it's pretty flat, it's very flat right now, but I like to make sure that it's flat. So I made a sanding board, and basically all it is a piece of Baltic birch, 3/4 inch. And I've got 220 on one side and 320 on the other. And the other, I just did it, so it's not going to show very well, but take a sandpaper cleaner, just lean into it and you can clean this all off. I've used this board and this sandpaper probably for four years now. Eventually, I'll have to replace it, but by keeping it clean with the crepe, it lasts for a long time. So what I'm going to do is use a sanding board just to make sure that I don't have any humps or maybe some grain that's sticking up someplace. I like to use the tool rest when I do that. I'll set it out a little bit here and do the rough side, of course, first. Put my hand right here, set it on the rest, just bring it in. Doesn't really take much. Turn it over to fine paper. Apply a fair amount of pressure. That's it. That's all it takes. Now that it's dead flat, it's smoother than it was before. You see, it's polished there in most places. And now we're ready for the ring number 3. And just like ring number 2, when we put that on, with the ring number 2, if you recall, when we put that on, I used the chuck with the 4 key stocks on it. And this time, I've still got an issue, because if you can see here with the cone, if I put that cone on there, what's sticking out on the cone is deeper than I've got here. I can slide this up and show you. So I still got an issue. You can see it's loose. The cone is hitting the back side. So I'm going to have to go back to take the cone off. I use the cone on the larger ones. So I'm going to have to take the cone off and go back to the chuck concept. I like the cone because when I'm aligning this all up, I can rotate both and get it where I want to be. And put the ring in, tighten it up. And that assures me that I've got the precise location that I need for it to be in. Slide it up, and then I have to mark where these are where the lines are going to mark up. So I usually take a little little square, combination square, and I bring that pass line up, the pass joint. Usually I mark it all the way around, but we'll just mark a couple spots, so that gives me where I'm going to go.
You're lining that up with the ring beyond the one that
Yes,
you just shaped, so that they all are symmetrical.
Yes, so that they skip or brick lay up. And then I'll line that up with the joint in here. I'll put some glue on it, and then like we did before, I'll come around and put clamps on it. Put a dozen, there's 8 or 10 clamps around the outside. Let the glue set up and come back in a couple hours to turn it again. 2 to 3 hours is usually what I go. So I've got my jaw on this piece. I've got my jaw marked, jaw number 4. And somebody asked me one time why you picked jaw number 4, and it's because jaw number 4 is right on top, and my wrench is right here, so it's easy to see from there. What I am going to do next here is I've got a collar that I put on the chuck, and the reason I do this is because as I get a little larger in diameter, my clamps work better if I've got a better surface to clamp to than just the back of the chuck. So what I'm going to do then is going to drop this in. Note that the rod that goes through that the key runs on, I put a little bit of an indentation or a little bit of a hole there to allow that. And this simply goes on over the back side of the chuck. So as you can see from the first turning we did with ring 1 and 2, we've got 6, 7 rings on here. 7 rings on here now. And what is happening now when I'm turning, I get a little bit of vibration because I can't leave it out a little too far or far enough. So what I'm going to do is put the steady rest on the lathe. Okay, that's done. So next time we put clamp, then this allows me again to clamp it a little easier when I put my rings on. It gives me a little bit larger area in the back. Now, if I were going to make a real large piece, I'd probably have to make another ring that's a little larger. Before we set our tool rest, our steady rest, we're going to make sure that this is centered on the lathe. So I'm going to put the cone back in there. We're going to go ahead and put a little bit of pressure on it. Make sure it's all lined up. Then we're going to set the wheels. I put a little bit of pressure, but not too much. I don't want to throw it out. What I like to do is turn the wheels, make sure that I got a good fit there. Put the top one on last. That's locked in. Move the cone away. Then this is ring number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go back to the drawing. We'll go to ring 7, and the top of ring 7 on the ID is 7 1/4, and the outside 7 3/4. So I'm going to mark off 7 1/4. And then equal that out on each side. 3/8, 7 1/4, and the other side is pretty close. The outside is pretty close. So then we'll go ahead and turn the ID down. can't see the dot when it's... That's better. Take my sanding board, go in and sand this, and then put the next ring on, bring my cone in to center it, and clamp it, and we're good for another 3 hours. So with that, I'm going to stop, and we're going to take the next vessel, which I've got set up for further down the line here. I've got more rings put on it. So with that, we'll take this all off. I'll leave the steady rest on because we're going to use the steady rest. So what I've done here now is I've put 1, 2, 3, 4 more rings on since the last one. And this is the last ring, by the way. This is the top. Steady rest back in. And now we're going to do the same thing here. Actually, I don't have a inside or outside diameter, but I do have the high point on this ring. Now this is the ring that's sitting in here like this. This is the top piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off the 5.5. That will tell me where it breaks this way and then it breaks the other way. So 5.5 is the number we're looking for. I'll come in and mark the circle this time. That spacer I put on the chuck a little bit ago really works nice for a hand wheel now. So I can turn it with my hand. Double check everything. But they said that was 5.5, correct?
Yep.
Okay, we're right on the money.
And just for clarity, that's your high point on that top curve.
That's
where
right.
it comes
That's
over.
right. Because this side's going to come up and it's going to hook inside. You can see on the drawing that hook that Bill's talking about. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and cut out this area inside, which can be a little tricky. But I built a tool to do that. And that's this tool here. This will allow me, if we can look at the drawing here, this will allow me to come in, oh it's backwards here now, but it allows me to come in and cut this inside part here that I need to cut.
And that's a homemade tool.
This is a homemade tool. Anybody can make it. This is just 4142 steel, and alloy 4142 is a really an excellent steel for something like this. And it's got a high strength. It's got some carbon to it, so it's got a high strength. It's got it's not going to bend on you, but yet it's not too hard. And then I simply purchased a carbide tip and put on it. This is set up with a laser, so I can follow a map. I could take this and put it on a shelf above, and then follow the laser line with the curve of that. But today we don't need to do that because it's not that complicated cut. So instead of using the regular tool rest, we have a little table that we use. Now this has to be set up on the center line because we're going to be working strictly from the center line. And fortunately, we've got a center line here, and that we've got our segment marks that we can go by. So I'll raise that up to get it to the center line. A little higher, right about there. Okay, that's good. And
your table's at the center line, not your cutter.
the tables at this. Oh, good point. I usually cut the. Used to do it that way, but I found it. That's a good point. Thank you. It works better, I found, to go cut on the center line. That's right. Being a new tool, I'm always trying to learn better ways to use them. And I used to cut a little above center, but now I cut right on center. I can go in and I can feel that outside wall, and I can feel that bottom where that's at, and so that's how we're gonna. You got to be real careful when you put the tool in there that you don't hit it on the way in. Wall there. Now the point here is that when I cut in, I don't want to cut a lot of surface on the cutter. I want to try to come in and cut a little bit at a time, so I'm working on a small radius of the cutter bit itself. I think I might have it. When I get a little bit larger opening, you get that tool in and out. Yeah, I got a little bit more to take, but there's not much to see. But that's the idea. I'll bring that out to the same dimension here, and then I'll come in and shape this around here on the ID and the OD to bring that around. So with that, I think that pretty much explains everything that I'm doing here. The next time we'll do the shaping of the outside. I'll bring the tailstock in, put a cone in it, so that I don't have that chatter which we just heard, which drives me nuts. And then we'll start to shape the outside. We're close on the outside, but we still got some fine tuning to do. When I look across the top here, it's not perfect yet, and we can do that. Besides, I've got extra stock there that I put in there. Usually with most of the vessels that I do, I'm trying to make them thinner and thinner on each one I do, and I'm down to 1/8 to 3/16 of most of the stuff I do. But this I want to shoot more for 1/4 of an inch wall thickness because it's going to be used. And the inside, we've turned that to the exact dimensions shown on the drawings, so I can always put the calipers on the outside and then subtract that from the inside, divided by 2, and I've got the wall thickness. So by having it exactly the dimensions on the ID, I can determine exactly where I'm at on the OD to get the wall thickness that I'm shooting for. Once we get that done, then we'll sand it, and then we'll get into doing the finishing of the piece. The last time we were working with this tool, this is still kind of like a prototype with me, and I'm still trying to learn the little idiosyncrasies of the device. We set it up the last time on center so that the cutter was on the center of the piece, and I had a real hard time getting to keep from gouging. So playing around with it a little bit, I discovered that I was best to have that cutter edge at 1/8 of an inch above the center of the piece. And I think part of the problem is that the deflection, as this starts to work, it bends down a little bit, and by being on center, it kicked into the bottom part and didn't have a chance to relieve itself. So by being 1/8 of an inch above center, that allowed it to make that deflection and then return back and not actually cause a catch, is what we call it. Basically, I've got the inside of this is all done now, ready for varnish. It's sanded, ready to go. So what I want to do next is we want to go in and shape the outside. I still got a little bit of a band around here where the wheels are running on. So I want to show you how I go in and shape this. We're going to take this off, And now that I've got this inside down, we're going to put a cone in there so I get a little more stability and a little smoother running to make this final shape on the outside. As you can see by the camera here, this is the band that I left on there that I was running the wheels for the steady rest on. So I want to get rid of that and want to do the final shaping. As you can see, it's kind of lumpy there, which I really like to save the final shaping until I get done. And then I get rid of the steady rest, go to the tailstock, and that gives me a little bit more stability. So that's what we're going to be doing next, is doing that. A couple little techniques that I've learned over doing this. We'll cover that. Meanwhile, I'm going to give this a quick sharpen here. And it doesn't take much, just about, that's all we need. And again, you can see the shiny surfaces there. That's what I just filed. Because the stone leaves a concave surface, all it's doing is hitting on the edges. It doesn't take much to sharpen that. So that's what we've done. And we're going to go ahead and may have to adjust my tool rest. I can take more or less. I'm going to lower the handle here a little bit. You can see I'm not cutting anything. So I'm going to raise it up until it just starts to cut. That's a real fine cut. Sometimes I want a real fine cut when I get real close to where I want to go. Now I'm going to raise it up a little bit more and get a hairier cut. So I've got a lot of stock to move. Thickness. I've got plenty of wall thickness to work with. I try to get my wall thickness, I've been trying to get it down to around 1/8 of an inch. For these vessels, I'm going to go a little thicker because they will be used as a utility piece. So I want a little bit more strength, so I'll probably shoot for 1/4 inch wall thickness. Now, you probably can't see it, but when I'm doing these cuts right now, I've got confidence here that I know what my tool is doing, so I'm actually watching up here. So once I get my tool to the cut I want, and I'll shift down and watch the top, and I can see across the top where I'm at. I can look for lumpy areas that I can go for. And I can see I got a little more to take here, a little heavier cut. So I'm going to raise my handle. How much thickness I want to take off. I think you get the idea here of what we're doing. So I'm going to stop here at this point. No need of taking up all your time. The one trick that I like to do is take a square or a straight edge. A foot longer or 4 inch, it doesn't matter which, but I like to run this over the edge and I'll eyeball down alongside, and as long as I'm touching just in one spot, I'm in a pretty good spot. Now right here I notice I've got a flat spot because what happens is I got 2 points that are hitting at the same time. So what I need to do is mark that, and then I'll go in and I'll have to determine which high spot to take off. So as you can see, it comes up and it stops. It doesn't rock. So I got to take care of that, and then I go on across and look for spots that are even close to 2 pointing. There's a high spot there. I can see the high spots because I've got fairly large degrees on both sides of the rule that I can determine. Now here's a spot that I haven't worked on yet, but you can see it's hidden, and I got basically very little daylight between the whole length, 2 inches there. So what I'll do there is I'll go ahead and I'll cut the base back a little bit more, and then go back in with the straight edge and make sure that I'm rocking on every spot on the piece. So that's a little way that you can tell if you got any flat spots, and you can also feel it. You can feel flat spots real well. So I'm going to take, and once I get this shaped, the shape is about there. It's a little rough yet, so I'll smooth it up with the chisel. Cut this base down, and then I'll hit it briefly with sanding. Let's talk about sanding just a little bit, because I think some people sand differently than other people do. I like to use this sander and basically sand it that way. And sometimes I'll start off with, if it's really rough, I'll start off with 120 or 220, and I'll sand it. And then when you stop and look at it, if you see a mark, like one spot in the piece that you still have a sanding mark, take your sandpaper and sand the other way. Because oftentimes, if you got just a little bit of mark here and it's fine all the rest of the way around, rather than sand the whole thing with spinning, just take and sand it against the grain in that spot where that mark is at. Once the mark's gone, then go back and down to one size smaller on your sandpaper, turn it back on, and come around. Even with this sander, go to the next finer grit paper, go around, and then check and see if you've got any marks. Because what you're doing is the same grit paper, when you're sanding 90 degrees to where the marks are, you can tell when the mark's gone. And it's the same, the little grooves, the sandpaper marks, then in the opposite direction. So the next time when you come back around, if your sandpaper's going the other way, it'll get rid of those marks there. And you can go back and forth between the directions of sanding until you get it sanded where you want it done. Typically, these pieces, I'll sand them down to about 1,000 grit and then put the varnish on. So a couple little tricks on sanding that works very well for me. There are probably other tricks out there too that works for other folks, but at any rate, I think what we'll do next is, I think we're going to work on the lid. I've got two things I want to do yet. I want to show you how I put the varnish on, and I want to show you how I cut the thing loose. And that's kind of a neat little, with the tendon we talked about some time ago. That's a real easy way to cut it loose from the lathe. So with that, we're going to switch over and do a couple other things here, and then we'll come back to this. Okay, we're going to switch over at this point and show you how to make the tops. And basically what I did, the tops are not going to be segmented, of course, but just a chunk of wood, walnut and cherry for each one of them. And I glued a dovetail block on the back side of it. That's what I do, is I'll cut this dovetail block off, and I'll use it several times before it just eventually gets too short. There again, when I glued that on, I marked the jaws. I always mark the jaws, which jaws where, so that I can come back in and get reasonably close to where I was at before. And put that in, and then start turning it. The one thing that you notice, I went to a smaller block so that this can actually go in the opening on the vessel, so I can make this cut here and get it to fit exactly the way I wanted it. Before I've done it, I've measured it and then cut it loose from the mounting, and then to find out it should have been turned just a little bit smaller. So by going to a smaller mounting block on there, that allows me to get that fit exactly the way I want it. Now next move I would do would be to go in and make this bottom cut here to fit the particular vessel. So we're going to skip that, and I'm going to go to one that I've already done, which is this one. And again, looking for the markings here to get the... Now this one, like I said, I've already fit into the vessel. It fits good. And I shaped the top to the shape I want. And then this whole thing is supposed to look somewhat like an apple. So in order to do that, I then took it to the disc sander and sanded this bevel on it to get it where I wanted it. Now, like all the beads of courage boxes, we try to put the bead in the box, in someplace on the box. So that's what I'm going to do now, is I like to put that bead inlaid in the end of the top. So In order to do that, I've got to drill a hole in there. It's got to be drilled at an angle. So I built this device that goes in the tool list. And basically what this is a 1-inch dowel that's glued into this block. And then in the drill press I took the drilled a hole for a Forstner. I'll be using a Forstner bit as a guide for the Forstner bit. So I've already marked on the end here the center, because it's on a slope, it's a little different, where the center of the hole needs to be. So then I'm going to come up and mount this right against the end of that. And then I'll go take a peek inside to make sure that it's not, make sure that the center, the mark that I put in there is in the center of the dot that I left there. It's pretty close. And I've locked the lathe up so that it doesn't turn. I'll lock the spindle down here so it's good and solid. And make the final adjustments here on the bead. Okay, that's pretty good. Now we're going to take the drill. And I need a piece of tape. I'm going to tape the depth so I get the right depth. Well, actually, the way it turns out, it's real close to the chuck. So normally I put a piece of tape on the shank of the drill bit, and then go to the tape. But it's about 1/8 of an inch short of chucking out. So okay. So now we have a hole for our bead. Take this all apart, and we're all set. So all I have to do is glue that in, and that piece now is ready to varnish. Okay, it's done. Okay, to get started, I got this from Steve Sinner. He always recants all of his varnish into fruit jars, candy jars, and I do the same thing. One thing that I was doing there, I couldn't get the ring, it had locked down, it was tight, I couldn't get it loose. And this goes with these kind of rings, or even in the kitchen, and your wife can't get something. If you try to turn it and you can't turn it, quarter turn it, try it again. If that doesn't work, quarter turn it again. Chances are by the time you do it 4 times, you'll find the weak spot or where it's at to get it open. So just a little point. And basically what it's doing is there's tolerance between the jar and the ring, and what you're doing is you're finding where that is loose in the ring. Anyway, the other thing I like to do is I like to store my brushes in paint thinner. And gosh, I use a brush for probably 100, 200 times. And then when I get done, I just squeeze out the extra varnish and put it back in here again, and it's good to go. Every once in a while you got to clean out the jar. That works real well for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the lathe, the converted lathe to a finishing lathe, and I'm running 24.5 RPMs, which I think is perfect for what I do. You'll notice that it's running backwards. So my chuck here, I've got a bolt that comes in, and so that the thing doesn't back out and end up falling on the floor. And we'll go in now, and I got a flashlight here. We're going to go in and do the bottom. Oftentimes with my vessels, when I get towards the top, they're much smaller and I can't get in like I can on this one. So before I put the last 2 or 3 rings on, I will go in and varnish it while I still got a large enough opening. I like to finish and sand and finish my inside as well as the outside. It's good practice to get into. Got a light here that does pretty good for me as far as shining in there, and I got one spot on the bottom that's a little shy on varnish. I think my favorite finish is a polyurethane finish, but I think it's probably the hardest there is to put on. And Steve Sinner was able to show me how he does it, and after he showed me how he does it, I found that it works real well for me. But as he told me, he said, slop the varnish on as quick as you can get it on, because your work time on polyurethane is pretty quick. You got to get it on and get it smoothed out. So we're going to put as much as we can on as quick as we can on the outside. Make sure we got it all covered. And I'm not doing a very good job of that, I can see right now. My goodness. Goes to show I can't talk and work at the same time. And then if you see, I've got a an LED tube, like a fluorescent tube above, and that works really well for me, because when I get all the varnish on here, and I'm not doing a very good job here, really got to slop it on and get it all coated, because what we're going to do when we've got it all coated, we're going to start up at the top and we're going to basically squeegee off the excess. So I take the bottom of my brush so that it's not touching the wood, and I simply come along and squeegee it off. Now you can see the excess is dripping down on the table, which is fine. And we'll come across at 24.5 RPMs. You got to go a little slow so that you get it all covered. So come around the end. And that's all it takes. Now the problem is, if you go over it again, it sets up so quickly that if you start to go over it again, it'll start to pull the varnish. And I'll just squeeze out the excess varnish here. The other thing I wanted to point out to you, that the light, maybe the camera's picking it up, the light, the long tube, you take your eye and you focus on that light in there. Not on the surface of the wood, but on the light itself. And it takes a little bit to get the mind to do that. But now you can focus on that light, and you can kind of go across and you can see if you've got any blips or anything that you've missed. And I think I've got a pretty decent job. The other thing, as it starts to dry, right now, because the varnish is wet, you got a nice smooth, that line is a nice smooth line. As the varnish starts to dry, you'll start to get some blips in there where the varnish, you probably can start to see it now, where the light is a little fuzzy, starting to get a little fuzzy, and that's just telling me that it's starting to set up a little bit in some spots. With the walnut, unlike the cherry, the walnut usually takes about 8 to 10 coats of finish in order for it to get a nice smooth finish. The walnut is so porous that it's pulling that varnish in. The cherry, unlike the cherry, I can put 5 coats on it and looks just as good as it takes to do the equivalent of 10 on the walnut. So with that, I'll let it turn here for, the first coat dries pretty quickly. The second coat, I'll probably let this set for an hour, turning like this. And at that point, it comes out pretty good. And then for the next coat, like, you will take and sand between coats, and you'll see that. And then come back in, put another coat on it. And I let the wood tell me how many coats it takes, because you can start to see, like I say, looking at the line, you can see the fuzzy line, the light in there, or just with the finish itself. The hardest part is, like some turners have told me, and I've done it, you get down to one more coat, and then you put the coat on and you found the spot you missed. Kind of aggravating. But now the other thing I wanted to point out is, when I varnish the inside, it takes a long time for that to dry. So I put a little computer fan or a muffin fan right here that will blow into that, and with that fan on there, it'll dry just on the inside just as fast as it does on the outside. So that's one coat. Okay, this particular vessel, we now have one coat of finish on it. It's pretty rough. and we always have to sand between finishes, between layers. So I'm going to go in with either 600 or 800. I think I've got 600 at this point, and we're going to give this a real light sanding. This is where I really like the little inertia sanders, because you can see how I'm not much here. You can see where it's. I'm not running real true on the lathe. I've got a little bit of bottom around here, so I must not have got it quite in the chuck when I wanted it, but it's going to be sufficient for what I'm doing. After the first coat, that should do that. After the first coat, I take the air compressor, especially with walnut, and I blow all the dust out of the grain. And then I take a mineral spirits on a rag. Now, this may change with the type of finish that you end up putting on it, because mineral spirits is going to leave a little bit of residual on the wood that may not be good for your finish, but where I'm using a poly finish, it works just fine. So basically I can wipe all that, it's not really sawdust, it's varnish dust off, and I catch it on the rag here. With that, that's all it takes for between coats. And now this is ready, and in a little bit we'll put another coat of finish on it. Okay, the last step, we're going to cut this baby loose from the chuck. And if you'll remember back when we glued that on there, we made a little tendon that went inside the base of the bowl. This is, when I start to cut this loose, you'll see that's where it's really nice, because I can cut it totally free of the chuck, and with having the tailstock in here with a pad between that and the vessel, I can totally cut it free and I don't have to worry about chasing around the shop. So with that, we're going to go in and I'm going to start to cut this. Now when I glued it, you'll remember I only put glue about on the outside ½ inch diameter, so I don't have to go all the way down. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm starting to cut this here. I'm going to turn it back so that the cherry is exposed. I'm going to cheat a little bit and use the parting tool, using the edge of it, to go in and clean off the shoulder of that piece. There we go. I just went, I got part of it off and still left on there. I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit more. There we go. So, go in now and a lot of times what I do is I mark the diameter of where the glue stops. I mark it on my drawing. I didn't do that this time because I got 3 vessels I'm making at the same time. So actually, what I've done is I went in to cut it until I see the shoulder being the same color as the chuck. So it's actually loose at this point. It's just sitting on the end of the tendon. And I'm going to go in and just clean up the bottom of the vessel. I'm going to put just a little bit of taper on it, inward taper, and it's done. It's cut loose. So, and you're not chasing around the shop after trying to pick it up off the floor. So we'll take the tailstock off. Ooh. There we go. Must have been a little bit of glue residual in the shoulder. So that's it. What I'll do now is I'll go in with a hand sand the bottom and put a coat of finish on that, and the lid, we'll varnish the lid and it will be done. And that's it. So this is the lid, and I've got to part that off yet, but I can do that later. Actually, I don't want to part that off until I put my finish on it. And then that goes on in there, and the bead pops in there. So what I'll do is I'll put some silicone caulking in the bottom of that, pop the bead in, and that's it. That's all she wrote.